The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and fading hope, but it was Dad's raspy whisper that sliced through the silence. Lila, you were my heart, but I know hers was yours. I froze, my hand on the doorframe, as the world I thought I knew unraveled in a single breath. I'm Nora Harper, 22, and I grew up in a small, sun-dappled house in Portland, Oregon, where my parents, Lila and Thomas Harper, seemed like the perfect couple. 40 years of marriage, 2 kids, and a life stitched together with potlucks, church picnics, and quiet evenings on the porch. But that night in the hospital, as Dad's heart monitor beeped its final rhythm, I overheard a truth that cracked my reality wide open. Mom was a lesbian, and Dad had known all along. It was late October 2025, and the rain tapped against the hospital windows like a restless confession. I'd come to say goodbye to Dad, his lung cancer finally winning after a brutal 2-year fight. Mom sat by his side, her hands clasped tightly around his, her face a mask of grief. I thought I'd slipped in unnoticed, but Dad's words stopped me cold. You gave me everything, Lila, he said, voice barely above a whisper. But you never gave her up, did you? Mom's sob was soft, almost inaudible, but it carried the weight of decades. I backed away, heart pounding, unsure if I'd trespassed on a secret or stumbled into a love story I was never meant to understand. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table in our old Craftsman home, the one with creaky floors and a fireplace that always smelled faintly of cedar. Mom was making coffee, her movements mechanical, her eyes red-rimmed but guarded. I wanted to ask her everything. Who was she? Why did you stay? Did you love Dad? But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I watched her pour cream into her mug, the same way she had every morning for as long as I could remember. Nora, she said finally, not looking at me. There's a lot you don't know about your father and me. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath it, like a river about to overflow. I didn't push her then. Maybe it was cowardice, or maybe I wasn't ready to face the truth. But that moment lit a spark in me, a need to understand the woman who'd raised me, who'd tucked me in with bedtime stories and taught me how to braid my hair. Who was Lila Harper, really? And who was the her Dad had spoken of with such quiet acceptance? The answers began to surface a week later at Dad's memorial. It was held at a community center in southeast Portland, filled with faces I'd known my whole life. Neighbors, church friends, my older brother Ethan and his wife. But there was one stranger. A woman in her late 30s, blonde curls framing a face that seemed both familiar and foreign. She stood at the back, her green eyes fixed on Mom, who hadn't noticed her yet. I watched as the woman clutched a small notebook, her fingers tracing its worn edges. When she finally approached Mom, their embrace was brief but electric, like a circuit completing after years of being unplugged. Her name was Cassie Monroe, a photographer who'd grown up in the same small town as my parents. She spoke softly to Mom, her words too quiet for me to hear, but the way Mom's shoulders softened told me everything. This was her, the one Dad had meant, the one Mom had loved in secret for decades. I cornered Cassie later, outside under a dripping awning. You knew my parents, I said, more accusation than question. She didn't flinch. I knew Lila, she corrected, her voice warm but firm. And I loved her. Still do. Her words hit like a punch, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. She handed me the notebook, its pages filled with handwritten letters, sketches, and photographs. Fragments of a love story Mom had buried to build the life I'd grown up in. That night, I sat on my childhood bed, the notebook open in my lap. The first page was dated 1983, when Mom was 19, her handwriting bold and hopeful. Cassie, you're the only one who sees me. I read until dawn, each word peeling back the layers of a woman I thought I knew. Mom had met Cassie at a community college art class. 2 young women drawn together by shared dreams and a forbidden spark. But this was Reagan's America, and in their small Oregon town, love like theirs was a dangerous secret. When Mom got pregnant with Ethan, she made a choice. Marry Dad, a kind man who loved her fiercely, and bury her truth to protect her family. I closed the notebook, my chest tight with anger, grief, and awe. How had she done it? 40 years of hiding who she was, of loving Dad while carrying Cassie in her heart. And how had Dad known, yet stayed? I needed answers, but more than that, I needed to know if Mom could still find the courage to live her truth. The next day, I found her in the backyard, pruning roses in the gray morning light. "Mom," I said, holding out the notebook, "we need to talk about Cassie." Her hands stilled, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not of me, but of the life she'd left behind. "Nora," she whispered, "I don't know how to start," but she did. And as the rain fell, she told me about a love that had shaped her, a sacrifice that had defined her, and a truth she was finally ready to face. Mom's voice trembled as she spoke, the rose clippers forgotten in her hand. "Cassie was my first love," she said, staring at the garden as if it held the memories she'd locked away. "But I chose your father because it was safe, because it was what the world expected." We sat on the damp porch steps, the notebook between us like a fragile bridge. Mom was 45 now, her chestnut hair streaked with silver, but as she spoke of her youth, her eyes lit with a fire I'd never seen. She and Cassie had been inseparable in 1983, sneaking away to the cliffs overlooking the Columbia River, where they'd talk about art, freedom, and a future they could only dream of. "We were naive," Mom said, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "We thought love could conquer anything. But love couldn't conquer their small town's judgment." When Mom's pregnancy with Ethan was discovered, her parents, strict, church-going folks, gave her an ultimatum: marry Thomas, the quiet boy who'd been her friend since high school, or lose everything. "I was scared, Nora," she admitted. "Not just for me, but for Ethan. And your father, he was so good, so steady. He knew about Cassie, but he loved me enough to offer me a way out." I tried to imagine Dad, young and earnest, stepping into a marriage he knew was half a lie. "Did he love you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. Mom nodded, her eyes glistening. "He did, and I loved him in my own way. But it wasn't the same as what I felt for Cassie. That was consuming." The notebook held proof of that fire. Letters from Cassie, written in looping script, spoke of stolen kisses and promises to run away together. There were Polaroids, too. Mom laughing in a field, Cassie's arm around her, both of them radiant with youth. But the last letter, dated just before Mom's wedding, was a goodbye. "Lila, I can't ask you to choose me over your child, but I'll wait, always." My heart ached for Cassie, for the years she'd spent loving someone who'd chosen another life. I asked Mom why she'd kept the notebook all these years. She hesitated, then said, "It was the only piece of her I could keep." Her voice broke, and I realized she wasn't just grieving Dad. She was grieving the life she'd never lived. I reached for her hand, and for the first time, I saw her not as my mother, but as a woman who'd sacrificed her heart for us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Cassie, now a successful photographer in Seattle, according to the memorial's guestbook. Why had she come back? Did she still love Mom? And could Mom, after 40 years of duty, find the courage to love her back? I decided to find out. The next morning, I drove to Seattle, the notebook tucked in my bag. Cassie's studio was in a converted warehouse, filled with black and white photographs of cityscapes and intimate portraits. She greeted me with a warm but cautious smile, her green eyes searching mine. "You look like Lila," she said, and I felt a pang of something, jealousy, maybe, that she knew a version of my mother I never would. We sat in her small office, surrounded by frames and camera lenses. "Why did you come to the memorial?" I asked. Cassie leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of a photo frame. "I needed to say goodbye to Thomas. He was a good man, Nora. He loved your mom enough to let her keep me in her heart." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a longing that hadn't faded in 4 decades. She told me her side of the story, how she and Mom had planned to move to San Francisco, where they could be themselves, how Mom's pregnancy changed everything, how Cassie had waited, hoping Mom would come back, but eventually moved on with her career, though never with her heart. I never stopped loving her, Cassie said, her voice soft but unapologetic. But I respected her choice. I handed her the notebook, watching her face as she opened it. Her fingers trembled as she read, tears falling onto the pages. She kept this, Cassie whispered, more to herself than to me. All this time, I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, letting her grief and love fill the silence. When I left, Cassie gave me a photograph, a recent one of her and Mom, taken at a chance meeting in Portland a year ago. They were laughing, their hands brushing, and I saw the spark that had survived decades of separation. Tell her I'm still here, Cassie said as I left. If she's ready. Driving back to Portland, I felt the weight of their story pressing on me. Mom had built a life for us, but at what cost? And now, with Dad gone, could she reclaim the love she'd buried? I didn't know, but I was determined to help her try. Back in Portland, the photograph burned a hole in my pocket. Mom was in the kitchen when I got home, kneading dough for bread she didn't need to bake. We need to talk, I said, placing the photo on the counter. Her hands froze, flour dusting the air like a confession. The image showed her and Cassie, their laughter frozen in time. Mom's eyes lingered on it, a mix of pain and longing flickering across her face. Where did you get this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I told her about my trip to Seattle, about Cassie's studio, her words, her tears. Mom sank into a chair, her hands trembling. I thought I could forget her, she said. But I never did. She told me more about their youth, how Cassie had been the bold one, unafraid to dream of a life where they could hold hands in public. Mom, more cautious, had been torn between her love for Cassie and the pressure to conform. When I married your father, she said, I thought I could bury that part of me, but it was like burying half my soul. I asked the question that had haunted me since the hospital. Did you love Dad? Her answer was slow, deliberate. Yes, Nora. He was my best friend, my partner. But it was a different kind of love. With Cassie, it was like breathing. Her words hit me hard, not because they diminished Dad, but because they revealed a truth she'd carried alone for so long. I pushed the notebook toward her. She's still waiting, Mom. She told me to tell you she's still here. Mom's eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might run, either toward Cassie or away from the truth. Instead, she opened the notebook, her fingers tracing Cassie's words. I don't know if I'm brave enough, she admitted, her voice raw. Not after all this time. That night, I lay awake, thinking about courage. Mom had spent her life being brave for us, raising Ethan and me, standing by Dad through his illness, keeping her secret to protect our family. But this was different. This was about being brave for herself. I decided to help her, even if it meant pushing her toward a truth that scared her. The next day, I convinced Mom to come with me to a local art gallery where Cassie was exhibiting her work. It was a small event, but the gallery was alive with color and light, Cassie's photographs lining the walls. Mom hesitated at the entrance, her hand gripping mine. What if she doesn't want me anymore? She whispered. I squeezed her hand. She does. She always has. We found Cassie near a series of portraits, her blonde curls catching the light. When she saw Mom, her face lit up, but there was caution in her eyes. Lila, she said, stepping forward. Mom froze, then took a shaky step toward her. Cassie, she replied, her voice breaking. They stood there, inches apart, the years melting away in the space between them. I stepped back, giving them room. Their conversation was quiet, punctuated by tears and tentative smiles. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw the way Mom's shoulders relaxed, the way Cassie's hand brushed hers. It was like watching a wound heal in real time. I wandered the gallery, pretending to study the photographs, but my heart was with them, hoping they could find their way back to each other. When we left, Mom was quiet, but there was a lightness to her I hadn't seen before. She wants to meet for coffee, she said as we drove home. Just to talk. I smiled, knowing it was more than just coffee. It was a beginning. Over the next few weeks, Mom and Cassie started meeting regularly. Coffee turned into dinners, dinners into long walks through Portland's parks. I watched Mom come alive, her laughter brighter, her eyes softer. But there was tension too. Ethan, who'd always been close to Dad, struggled with the truth. How could she lie to us? He asked me one night, his voice thick with anger. I didn't have an answer, but I knew Mom's choice hadn't been about deceit. It had been about survival. I met Cassie again, this time at a cafe near her studio. She was different with me now, less guarded, more open. Your mom's scared, she told me, stirring her tea. She thinks she doesn't deserve this, after everything. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. Mom had spent so long putting others first that she didn't know how to claim happiness for herself. I decided to give her a push. I found an old mixtape in the attic, one Mom and Cassie had made in the 80s, filled with songs by Joan Armatrading and Tracy Chapman. I left it on her nightstand with a note. You deserve to be happy, Mom. Go to her. That night, she called Cassie, and I heard her laugh in a way I hadn't since I was a kid. The mixtape worked like a charm. Mom came downstairs the next morning, her eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. I'm seeing Cassie tonight, she said, almost shyly, as she poured her coffee. I grinned, trying not to push too hard, but inside, I was cheering. Their date was at a small jazz club in downtown Portland, the kind of place where candlelight flickered on worn wooden tables and the music felt like a heartbeat. I didn't go, of course, but Mom told me about it later, her voice soft with wonder. It was like we were 19 again, she said. Like no time had passed. Cassie had held her hand during a slow saxophone solo, and for the first time in decades, Mom hadn't looked over her shoulder to see who was watching. But happiness is never simple. Ethan's anger grew, bubbling up during a family dinner a week later. We were at his house, his wife Sarah trying to keep things light as their toddler babbled in the background. How could you do this to Dad? Ethan demanded, his fork clattering against his plate. Mom flinched, but her voice was steady. I loved your father, Ethan, but I couldn't be my whole self with him. Not like I can with Cassie. Ethan's face hardened. So you lied to us, to him, for our whole lives. I wanted to jump in, to defend Mom, but her hand on mine stopped me. I did what I thought was right, she said quietly. I gave you and Nora a stable home, but I paid a price for it. Ethan didn't respond, but the silence was heavy, and I knew he wasn't ready to forgive. I drove Mom home, the car filled with unspoken words. He'll come around, I said, hoping I was right. Mom nodded, but her eyes were distant. I just want you both to know I love you, she said. And I'm trying to be honest now, even if it's late. I squeezed her hand, wishing I could take away the guilt she carried. Meanwhile, Mom and Cassie's relationship deepened. They spent weekends together, exploring Portland's bookstores and hiking trails. Cassie showed Mom her darkroom, teaching her how to develop photos the old-fashioned way. I saw one of their prints, a candid shot of Mom laughing, her head thrown back, her silver-streaked hair catching the light. It was beautiful, and it made me ache for all the years she'd hidden that joy. But the past wasn't done with us. One afternoon, I found an old letter from Dad in the attic, tucked inside a box of his things. It was dated a year before his diagnosis, addressed to Mom. Lila, it read, I've always known about Cassie. I see it in your eyes when you think no one's looking. I don't regret our life, but I want you to be free when I'm gone. You deserve that. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, realizing Dad had loved her enough to let her go. I showed Mom the letter that evening. She read it in silence, her hands shaking. He knew, she whispered. All those years he knew. She cried then, not just for Dad, but for the weight of his sacrifice. I held her, feeling the pieces of our family story shift into place. Dad hadn't just been her husband. He'd been her ally, carrying her secret so she could build a life for us. The next day, Mom invited Cassie over for dinner. It was the first time I'd seen them together in our home, and it felt like a milestone. Cassie brought a bottle of wine and a nervous smile, her green eyes scanning the room as if expecting judgment. But I welcomed her, setting an extra place at the table. We talked about everything: her photography, my job at a local bookstore, Mom's love of gardening. For a moment, it felt like any other family dinner, but beneath it was a current of something new, something fragile and precious. Ethan didn't come. He texted me earlier, saying he wasn't ready. I didn't push him, but I hoped time would soften his heart. Mom deserved that much. As Cassie helped clear the dishes, their hands brushing in the kitchen, I saw a glimpse of the future. A future where Mom could be herself, fully and unapologetically. That night, I found Mom in the backyard, staring at the stars. "I'm scared, Nora," she admitted. "What if I'm too old for this? What if I've hurt too many people?" I sat beside her, the grass cool beneath us. "You're not too old to be happy," I said. "And you haven't hurt us. You've loved us. Now it's your turn." She smiled, a real smile, and I knew she was starting to believe me. The seasons changed, and so did Mom. By spring, she and Cassie were inseparable, their love a quiet rebellion against the years they'd lost. They'd sit on the porch, sharing stories over coffee, their laughter filling the house with a warmth I hadn't known we were missing. But Ethan's silence grew louder. He stopped coming to family dinners, his texts short and clipped. I knew he was grieving Dad, but I also knew he was wrestling with Mom's truth. One evening, I drove to his house, determined to bridge the gap. He was in his garage, tinkering with an old radio, his face set in a frown. "Ethan," I said, "you can't keep punishing her for being herself." He sighed, setting down his tools. "It's not that simple, Nora. She lied to Dad, to us. How do we trust her now?" I thought of Dad's letter, his quiet acceptance of Mom's heart. "Dad knew," I said, handing him a copy I'd made. "He loved her anyway. Maybe we can too." Ethan read the letter, his jaw tight, but I saw the anger in his eyes soften, just a fraction. Back home, Mom was planning a trip with Cassie. A week in San Francisco, the city they dreamed of as teenagers. I helped her pack, folding her sweaters while she fretted about leaving the garden untended. "You're allowed to go," I told her, laughing. "The roses will survive." She hugged me then, her arms fierce and grateful. "You're my rock, Nora," she said, and I felt a swell of pride. The trip was a turning point. Mom came back glowing, her phone full of photos. Cassie at the Golden Gate Bridge, the two of them at a queer bookstore, their hands intertwined. But the joy was tempered by a call from Ethan. He wanted to meet, just the three of us. I braced myself, hoping he was ready to listen. We met at a diner, the kind with sticky booths and endless coffee refills. Ethan looked tired, but his voice was softer than before. "I read Dad's letter," he said to Mom. "I don't understand everything, but I'm trying." Mom reached for his hand, tears in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. "I just wanted you to have a good life." Ethan nodded, not quite smiling, but it was a start. Cassie became a fixture in our lives. She'd bring her camera to family gatherings, capturing moments I'd never thought to notice. Mom's hand on my shoulder, Ethan's daughter giggling in the grass. One day, she showed me a photo she'd taken of Mom at the coast, her hair wild in the wind, her smile unguarded. "This is who she's always been," Cassie said. "I'm just glad she's letting it show." But not everyone was as accepting. At a neighborhood barbecue, I overheard whispers, old friends of my parents, judging Mom's new life. "She's changed," one said, as if it were a crime. I wanted to defend her, to tell them about the sacrifice she'd made, but Mom stopped me. "Let them talk," she said, her voice calm. "I'm done hiding." Her courage inspired me. I started writing about her story, not for publication, but to understand it. The words poured out, her love for Cassie, her loyalty to Dad, the weight of her choices. It was messy and beautiful, like life. I showed it to Mom one night, nervous she'd hate it. Instead, she cried, pulling me into a hug. "You see me," she said. "You really see me." By summer, Mom and Cassie were talking about moving in together. Cassie's lease in Seattle was ending, and Mom's house, our house, felt too big for one person. I helped them plan, sorting through decades of memories to make room for new ones. Ethan even pitched in, carrying boxes with a tentative smile. "I'm not there yet," he told me later, "but I want her to be happy." One evening, as we unpacked Cassie's things, I found another letter in the notebook. One Mom had written but never sent. "Cassie, you were my what if. If I'm brave enough, maybe you'll be my now." I slipped it back into the notebook, knowing Mom was finally living her answer. Moving day was chaos, but the good kind. Boxes cluttered the living room, and Cassie's photographs leaned against the walls, waiting to be hung. Mom was nervous, rearranging furniture like it could anchor her new reality. "What if this is a mistake?" she asked me, her hands twisting a dish towel. I laughed, pointing to Cassie, who was dancing to an old Bowie song in the kitchen. "Does that look like a mistake?" Cassie fit into our home like she'd always been there. She and Mom cooked together, their laughter spilling through the house. I'd catch them stealing kisses, shy at first, then bolder, as if they were reclaiming lost time. It wasn't perfect. Mom still worried about what the neighbors thought, and Cassie sometimes seemed unsure of her place in our family. But they were trying, and that was enough. Ethan came around more, bringing his daughter, Lily, who adored Cassie's stories about her travels. One afternoon, Lily drew a picture of Mom and Cassie holding hands, a child's simple acceptance of their love. Ethan looked at it, his expression softening. "She's happy," he said to me later, almost surprised. "I didn't think she could be." I nodded, knowing it wasn't just Mom's happiness. It was her freedom. But freedom came with challenges. At a local Pride event, Mom and Cassie walked hand in hand, their first public outing as a couple. I went with them, proud but nervous, watching for judgmental glances. Most people were kind, but a few old acquaintances from church gave Mom cold stares. She held her head high, her grip on Cassie's hand unwavering. "I spent too long hiding," she told me later. "I'm done with that." I started digging deeper into their past, piecing together the story from old letters and Cassie's memories. They'd met in an art class, where Cassie's bold sketches caught Mom's eye. Their first kiss was behind the community college, hidden by a willow tree, the world a blur around them. But the 80s were unkind to queer love, and Mom's pregnancy forced her to choose safety over passion. Cassie had left for Seattle, hoping distance would ease the pain, but it never did. One night, I asked Cassie why she'd waited so long. We were in the backyard, string lights glowing above us. "I didn't wait, not really," she said, her voice thoughtful. "I lived my life, built my career. But Lila was always there, in the back of my mind. When I heard about Thomas, I had to come back." Her honesty struck me. Love wasn't just passion. It was persistence, a quiet refusal to let go. Mom started opening up too, sharing stories she'd buried for years. She told me about the night she and Cassie planned to run away, their bags packed, only for Mom to panic at the last minute. "I thought I was protecting Ethan," she said, her eyes distant. "But I was also protecting myself from the world's judgment." I hugged her, wishing I could erase the pain of those choices. Ethan's thaw continued. He invited Mom and Cassie to Lily's birthday party, a small gesture that felt monumental. Cassie brought her camera, capturing Lily blowing out candles, Mom's arm around her. Later, Ethan pulled Mom aside. "I'm sorry I was hard on you," he said. "Dad would have wanted this." Mom cried, and I did too, watching from across the room. I kept writing, my notes turning into a manuscript. It wasn't just Mom's story. It was Dad's, Cassie's, ours. I showed it to Cassie, who read it with tears in her eyes. "You've got a gift, Nora," she said. "This could help people." I wasn't sure I was ready to share it, but her words planted a seed. As fall approached, Mom and Cassie planned a commitment ceremony. Not a wedding, but a promise to each other. They wanted it small, just family and close friends, in the backyard under the oak tree. I helped them plan, stringing lights and arranging flowers, my heart full. Ethan agreed to give a toast, a sign he was finally coming around. The night before the ceremony, Mom found me in my room, holding Dad's letter. "He'd be happy for me, wouldn't he?" she asked. I nodded, my throat tight. He loved you enough to want this, I said. She smiled, and for the first time, I saw peace in her eyes. The backyard was transformed for the commitment ceremony, glowing with fairy lights and wildflowers. Mom wore a simple white dress, her silver-streaked hair loose, while Cassie chose a tailored suit, her blonde curls catching the evening light. They stood under the oak tree, hands clasped, their vows quiet but fierce. I loved you then, I love you now, Cassie said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I'll love you always. Mom's vow was simpler, but no less powerful. You're my home, Cassie. I'm finally here. I stood with Ethan, Lily on his shoulders, all of us crying and smiling as they sealed their promise with a kiss. Ethan's toast was short but heartfelt. To Mom and Cassie, he said, raising a glass. To love and to second chances. The small crowd cheered, and I saw Mom's shoulders relax, as if his words had lifted a weight she'd carried for years. Lily ran to them, hugging their legs, and the moment felt like a new beginning for all of us. But life doesn't pause for happy endings. A week later, Mom got a call from an old friend, Margaret, who'd been at the ceremony. She'd heard rumors around town, gossip about Mom's new lifestyle, laced with judgment. Mom brushed it off, but I saw the hurt in her eyes. I thought we'd moved past this, she said, her voice tight. Cassie took her hand. We'll face it together, she promised, and I believed her. I kept writing, the manuscript growing into something I couldn't ignore. I shared it with a professor from my college days, who encouraged me to submit it to a local publisher. This is raw, Nora, she said. It's real. People need to hear it. I hesitated, worried about exposing Mom's story, but she gave me her blessing. If it helps one person feel less alone, she said, it's worth it. Cassie started teaching Mom photography, and the house filled with their prints, black and white shots of Portland's bridges, color photos of our garden. One day, I found a portrait of myself, taken when I wasn't looking, my face soft with thought. You're part of this too, Cassie told me, smiling. Your strength helped us get here. Ethan's relationship with Mom improved, but it wasn't perfect. He'd call her more, invite her over, but there were still moments of tension. One night, he admitted to me, I miss Dad, and I'm still mad she wasn't honest. I nodded, understanding his grief. She's trying now, I said. Maybe that's enough. He didn't reply, but he hugged me, and I knew he was trying too. The community wasn't always kind. At a local market, Mom and Cassie were holding hands when a woman from church walked by, her stare icy. You're living in sin, she said, loud enough for others to hear. Mom froze, but Cassie stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. We're living in love. That's enough for us. The woman walked away, but the encounter shook Mom. That night, she and Cassie talked for hours, their voices low and steady, rebuilding their courage. I started attending local queer community events, partly to support Mom, partly to understand her world. I met people who'd faced similar struggles, hiding their truth, finding it again. Their stories echoed Mom's, and I realized her journey wasn't just personal. It was part of a larger fight for acceptance. I added their voices to my manuscript, weaving a tapestry of resilience and love. One evening, Mom and Cassie invited me to a gallery show featuring their joint work, a series of photographs called Reclaim Time. Each image told a piece of their story. The cliffs where they'd fallen in love, the notebook they'd shared, their hands intertwined. The gallery was packed, and I saw pride in Mom's eyes as strangers praised their art. This is who I am, she told me later. I'm finally proud of it. As winter settled in, I found a new letter in the notebook, written in Mom's hand. Cassie, you're my second chance. Thank you for waiting. I smiled, knowing they'd found their way home. Not just to each other, but to themselves. Winter brought a quiet rhythm to our lives. Mom and Cassie settled into their shared home, their routines blending seamlessly. Morning coffee, evening walks, late-night talks by the fire. I'd visit, finding comfort in their laughter. The way they moved around each other like a dance they'd always known. But the world outside wasn't always kind. A local newspaper ran a story about their gallery show, calling it controversial for its queer themes. Mom shrugged it off, but I saw the tension in her jaw. "I'm not ashamed," she said, but her voice wavered. Cassie, ever steady, pulled her close. "We're not hiding anymore," she said, and Mom nodded, drawing strength from her. My manuscript was accepted by a small Portland press, a milestone that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I showed Mom and Cassie the first draft, nervous about their reaction. They read it together, curled up on the couch, their faces a mix of pride and vulnerability. "You've told our story," Mom said, her voice thick with emotion. "But it's your story too, Nora." Cassie nodded, adding, "You've given us a voice." Ethan was still navigating his feelings. He'd come to the gallery show, standing quietly in the back, but he didn't stay long. Later, he called me, his voice heavy. "I'm trying, Nora, but it's hard to see her so different." I reminded him of Dad's letter, of the love that had held our family together. "She's not different," I said. "She's just free." He was quiet, but I heard the shift in his silence, a willingness to try. The community's judgment lingered. At a church service Mom attended out of habit, the pastor preached about traditional values, his eyes lingering on her. She left early, Cassie waiting outside in the car. "I don't need their approval," Mom told me later, but the hurt was there, raw and real. I admired her resilience, but I hated that she had to be so strong. Cassie's photography gave them an outlet. They started a project documenting queer elders in Portland, capturing stories of love and loss that echoed their own. I helped them interview subjects, moved by the courage of people who'd lived through decades of secrecy. One woman, in her 70s, told us, "I hid for so long, I forgot who I was. Don't let that happen to you." Mom squeezed Cassie's hand, her eyes shining with determination. I kept writing, my manuscript evolving into a book that wove Mom's story with others I'd met. It was more than a memoir. It was a call to see love in all its forms, to honor the sacrifices made for it. When I got the first printed copy, I gave it to Mom and Cassie, their names on the dedication page. "To Lila and Cassie, for teaching me that love is worth the wait." The book's release brought attention, some kind, some cruel. A local radio show invited me to talk, and I brought Mom and Cassie along. We spoke about love, family, and the cost of hiding. Callers were mixed. Some shared their own stories, others condemned us. Mom handled it with grace, her voice steady as she said, "I lived half my life in silence. I won't do it anymore." Ethan showed up at the book launch, a surprise that made my heart soar. He hugged Mom, then Cassie, his eyes red. "I'm proud of you," he told Mom, and I saw her shoulders lift, as if a final weight had fallen away. Lily ran to them, holding a copy of my book, her small hands tracing the cover. "Is this about Grandma?" she asked, and we all laughed, the sound light and free. One night, Mom and Cassie called me to the backyard, where they'd set up a small projector. They showed me a slideshow of their photos, old and new, a visual love letter to their journey. The final image was of them at the commitment ceremony, their faces radiant. "We're building a life," Mom said, her arm around Cassie. "And you're part of it." I went home that night, my heart full, knowing their story wasn't just about love. It was about courage, about choosing truth over fear. My book was out in the world, but the real story was here, in the quiet moments of a family redefined. The book's release changed everything. Strangers reached out, sharing how Mom's story had given them courage to live their truth. At a reading in a Portland bookstore, a young woman approached Mom, tears in her eyes. "I came out to my parents because of you," she said. Mom hugged her, her own eyes glistening, and I realized her journey was rippling outward, touching lives she'd never know. But not everyone was kind. Online, trolls attacked the book, calling it a betrayal of family values. Mom and Cassie faced hateful comments on their photography project's social media, accusing them of flaunting their love. Cassie deleted the worst ones, but I saw the toll it took on Mom, her smile faltering when she thought no one was looking. I thought I was ready for this, she told me one night, her voice small. I held her hand. You are ready. You're stronger than you know. Cassie was her rock, always there with a joke or a gentle touch. They started planning a new exhibit, this one focused on queer families, including ours. Ethan agreed to be photographed with Lily, a step that felt like a quiet victory. The shoot was chaotic. Lily kept running off, giggling, but the final image was perfect. Ethan smiling, Mom and Cassie behind him, Lily in their arms. It was family, messy and real. Ethan's journey wasn't over. He still struggled with Dad's memory, feeling like Mom's happiness somehow diminished it. But he was trying. He invited Mom and Cassie to his house for Thanksgiving, the first time we'd all be together for a holiday. Sarah cooked, Lily helped set the table, and I watched Mom and Cassie share a quiet look, their hands entwined under the table. Ethan raised a glass, his voice steady. To family, he said, and we all drank, the word feeling bigger than ever. The community's reaction was mixed. Some neighbors embraced Mom and Cassie, bringing casseroles and asking about their next exhibit. Others kept their distance, their silence louder than words. At a town meeting, a council member proposed a family-friendly art policy, a thinly veiled jab at their work. Mom spoke up, her voice clear. Art is about truth, she said, and my truth is love. The room was quiet, but a few people clapped, and I saw pride in Cassie's eyes. I kept promoting the book, doing readings across the Pacific Northwest. At one event, a man in his 50s shared his own story of hiding his sexuality for decades. Your mom's story saved me, he said, and I cried, knowing her courage had become a beacon. I called her that night, telling her about him. You're changing lives, Mom, I said. She was quiet, then whispered, I just wanted to live mine. Cassie's photography project grew, drawing attention from galleries in Seattle and San Francisco. They were invited to speak at a queer arts festival, a chance to share their story on a bigger stage. I went with them, watching as they stood together, Mom's hand in Cassie's, talking about love, loss, and reclamation. The audience was rapt, and I saw Mom stand taller, her fear replaced by defiance. Back home, I found another letter in the notebook, this one recent, written by Cassie. Lila, you're my always. Thank you for coming back. I showed it to Mom, who smiled, tears in her eyes. I'm glad I did, she said, and I knew she meant it. As spring approached, Mom and Cassie started planning a trip to Europe, a dream they'd had since their youth. I helped them book flights, my heart full at the thought of them exploring Paris and Rome, hand in hand. Ethan even offered to water the garden while they were gone, a small gesture that meant the world. One night, I sat with them in the backyard, the stars bright above us. I'm proud of you, I told Mom, my voice thick. She squeezed my hand, Cassie's arm around her. I'm proud of us, she said, and I knew she meant all of us. Our family, redefined by love and truth. Spring bloomed, and with it, Mom and Cassie's new life. They left for Europe, their suitcases packed with dreams they deferred for decades. I got postcards from Paris, scrawled with Mom's excitement. We walked along the Seine, hand in hand. I've never felt so free. I pinned them to my fridge, each one a reminder of her courage. Back home, the book gained traction, earning reviews in national outlets. Some praised its honesty, others called it divisive, but it was sparking conversations. I did a podcast interview, sharing how Mom's story had reshaped our family. Listeners wrote in, sharing their own struggles with identity and acceptance. One letter, from a teenager in Texas, stuck with me. Your mom's story makes me feel like I can be myself someday. I sent it to Mom, knowing it would mean the world. Ethan kept warming to Mom and Cassie. He invited them to Lily's school play, where they sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone. Afterward, he hugged them both, a gesture that felt like a milestone. I'm getting there, he told me later, his voice soft. I just want her to be happy. I nodded, knowing Dad would have wanted the same. The community's tension eased, slowly. The council members' art policy failed, thanks to a coalition of local artists and allies. Mom and Cassie's next exhibit, Family in Focus, was a hit, drawing crowds who saw their love as a celebration, not a controversy. One photo stood out. A candid of Mom laughing, Cassie's arm around her, the notebook open between them. The caption read, "Love, reclaimed." I kept writing, starting a blog to share stories of others like Mom. People who'd hidden their truth, then found it again. It became a community, a place for connection and healing. Mom and Cassie contributed, sharing photos and words that inspired others. "You're building something," Cassie told me, her green eyes bright, "just like we are." One evening, they invited me to a small gathering in the backyard, a celebration of their first year together. Friends, family, and a few gallery folks filled the space, their laughter mingling with the music. Ethan gave a toast, his voice steady. "To Mom and Cassie," he said, "for showing us what love looks like." Lily clapped, and I saw Mom wipe away a tear, her hand in Cassie's. Later, I found the notebook on the porch, open to a new page. Mom's handwriting was bold. "Cassie, you're my forever. Thank you for being my now." Beside it was a Polaroid of them from the trip, standing in front of the Coliseum, their smiles radiant. I tucked it back, my heart full. The next day, I walked with Mom in the garden, the roses in full bloom. "I'm happy, Nora," she said, her voice steady. "For the first time, I'm really happy." I hugged her, thinking of Dad, of his letter, of the love that had carried us here. He'd known, all along, that Mom's heart was big enough for all of us. As I drove home, I thought about the notebook, the letters, the photographs, pieces of a story that had shaped our family. Mom had spent 40 years hiding, but she'd found her way back, not just to Cassie, but to herself. And in doing so, she taught me that love isn't just sacrifice. It's courage, it's truth, it's the willingness to live fully, no matter the cost. The stars were out when I got home, bright against the Portland sky. I thought of Mom and Cassie, their hands entwined, their laughter echoing. And I knew, whatever came next, we'd face it together. As a family, redefined by love and stronger for it.